The Academy's prejudice. The Stellar Combat Institute floated in the neutral zone between three galactic empires, its crystalline structure reflecting starlight from nearby systems. Inside Training Hall 7, dozens of alien cadets gathered for their advanced combat session. The air thrummed with the low-frequency communications of insectoid Zephyrians, while the silicon-based quartzites clinked as they moved across the polished floor. Sarah Mitchell stood among them, one of only 5 humans admitted to the prestigious Academy this cycle. At 5 feet 8 inches, she barely reached the shoulders of most other cadets. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, regulation style, and her brown eyes tracked every movement in the room with practiced awareness. Combat. Instructor Krex entered the hall, his massive form commanding immediate attention. The Gorvak stood 9 feet tall, his gray-blue skin rippling with subcutaneous armor plates. 4 muscular arms ended in hands that could crush steel, and his reputation for ruthlessness in combat training was legendary throughout the Academy. Formation! Krex's voice boomed through the universal translator, though his natural growl still came through underneath. The cadets quickly arranged themselves by species, a habit that had formed naturally since day 1. Sarah noticed how Krex's yellow eyes lingered on the human contingent with undisguised contempt. She'd grown used to it over the past months. Most alien instructors shared the same prejudice. Humans were considered too fragile, too slow, too weak to compete in galactic-level combat. Today we practice grappling techniques against multiple opponents, Krex announced, his primary arms gesturing, while his secondary arms remained crossed. I need a volunteer to demonstrate defensive positioning. No one moved. They'd all seen what happened to volunteers in Krex's demonstrations. The Gorvak instructor's idea of teaching often involved considerable pain for the student. Krex's lipless mouth curved in what passed for a smile among his species. Perhaps our human cadets would like to contribute? You've been remarkably quiet during practical sessions. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes turning toward her. Next to her, fellow human cadet Marcus tensed, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. She'd been watching Krex for weeks, studying his movement patterns, cataloging his techniques. Every species had tells, habits ingrained through evolution. The Gorvak were no different. I'll volunteer, sir, Sarah said, stepping forward. The chittering and rumbling from the other cadets suggested surprise. Some species released pheromones indicating amusement or anticipation. They expected another demonstration of human inadequacy. Krex's smile widened, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Excellent. Cadet Mitchell, isn't it? Step into the circle. Sarah moved to the center of the training area, her steps measured and deliberate. She'd noticed something about Krex that few others had. His lower left arm always twitched slightly before he attacked. It was a microscopic tell, probably unnoticed by most observers, but she'd trained herself to spot such details from childhood. The first rule of multiple combat, Krex began, circling her like a predator, is to never let your opponents surround you. Maintain mobility, use the environment, and most importantly, he paused, all 4 arms spreading wide. Dominate through superior strength and speed. Without warning, Krex lunged. To most observers, he seemed to move instantly from his position to directly in front of Sarah. His primary arms reached for her shoulders while his secondary arm swept low, a technique designed to lift and slam opponents to the ground. But Sarah had seen the twitch. She'd read his weight distribution, predicted his angle of attack. Time seemed to slow as she processed the incoming threat. Instead of retreating or trying to block, both futile against Krex's superior strength, Sarah stepped into the attack. Her hands found specific points on Krex's primary arms, not to stop them but to guide them. She pivoted on her left foot using Krex's own momentum to redirect his charge. The principle was simple physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Krex's mass and velocity, combined with the sudden change in direction, created a force vector that his own body couldn't compensate for quickly enough. Sarah dropped her center of gravity, her right leg sweeping behind Krex's forward leg, while her hands maintained their grip on his arms. She turned her hips sharply, Adding rotational force to the equation, the result was spectacular. Krex's 9-foot frame lifted off the ground, his own momentum carrying him over Sarah's hip. He rotated in mid-air, his secondary arms flailing uselessly as his internal gyroscope tried to reorient. He crashed onto the training mat with a sound like thunder, the impact sensors in the floor lighting up to indicate a force equivalent to being hit by a small vehicle. The training hall fell absolutely silent. Every cadet, regardless of species, stood frozen in disbelief. Sarah remained in her finishing stance, balanced and ready, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. Krex lay on his back, his forearms spread wide, staring at the ceiling with what could only be described as shock. His armored skin had protected him from serious injury, but his pride had taken a devastating hit. "Impossible," whispered a Zephyrian cadet, its antennae quivering. "The human barely weighs 90 kilograms. Instructor Krex is over 300. Sarah straightened slowly, her hands returning to a neutral position. She'd learned long ago that in moments like these, actions spoke louder than words. Let them process what they'd seen. Let them question their assumptions. Krex rolled to his feet with surprising agility, his armor plates clicking as they realigned. His yellow eyes fixed on Sarah with a new intensity, but she noticed something different in his expression. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that might have been curiosity or even respect. "Explain," he demanded, his translator crackling with static from his emotional state. Sarah met his gaze calmly. "On Earth, we have creatures called ants. They can lift many times their own body weight, not through superior muscle density, but through understanding leverage and mechanical advantage." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Humans survived on a world where we were never the strongest, fastest, or toughest. We learned to use physics as our weapon." The other cadets began to murmur among themselves. Several moved closer, their earlier dismissal replaced with keen interest. "But your speed," Krex pressed. "No human can move fast enough to counter a Gorvac charge." "I didn't need to be faster," Sarah replied. "I just needed to be where you weren't expecting. You telegraphed your attack, a minor muscle twitch in your lower left arm, 0.06 seconds before you moved. Your species evolved as apex predators. You never needed to hide your intentions because nothing could challenge you." She gestured to the other cadets. "Every species here has similar tells, products of evolution in their native environments." A crystalline quartzite stepped forward, its faceted surface reflecting rainbow patterns. "You claim you can read all our combat patterns?" Sarah nodded. "Not perfectly, but I've spent 3 months observing everyone here." The Zephyrians flex their wing joints before aerial maneuvers. Quartzites shift their weight to their left side before using their natural resonance attacks. The Valdorians blink their third eye before employing their psychic pushes. The named species exchange glances, some attempting to suppress the mentioned behaviors even as she spoke. Krex circled her again, but this time his movement held no threat. He was reassessing, recalculating. "Show me this technique again." Slowly. Sarah nodded. "The key is understanding that strength becomes weakness when misdirected, may I?" She gestured toward him. When Krex nodded, she moved to demonstrate the throw in slow motion. "When you charge, your mass creates momentum in a specific direction. If I try to stop that momentum, I lose, but if I add just a small force perpendicular to your path." She placed her hands on his arms again, showing the angle. "Your own power does the work, I'm just the fulcrum." Other cadets gathered closer, forming a tight circle around the demonstration. Even the typically aloof ethereal minds descended from their meditation platforms, their gaseous forms swirling with interest. "This is why humans needed different combat systems," Sarah continued, still maintaining her instructional hold on Krex's arms. "Judo uses an opponent's force against them. Aikido redirects aggression. Boxing teaches economy of motion. Krav Maga focuses on ending threats quickly. We have hundreds of martial arts because we face thousands of different challenges." She released Krex and stepped back. "Every human culture developed fighting styles based on their specific needs. What you saw wasn't human strength overcoming Gorvac power. It was centuries of accumulated knowledge about how smaller fighters can defeat larger ones." The training hall buzzed with conversation now. Cadets spoke in their native languages, the universal translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Some demonstrated the movements Sarah had shown, testing the principles with their own physiologies. Instructor Krex stood still for a long moment, his forearms slowly uncrossing. When he spoke, his tone carried something it had never held when addressing humans before: respect. "I believe we have all been operating under a critical misconception," he announced, his voice cutting through the chatter. "We assumed that physical limitations determined combat effectiveness. But Cadet Mitchell has demonstrated that tactical adaptation can overcome raw power." He turned to face the assembled cadets. "Tomorrow's lesson plan is changed. Instead of practicing standard Gorvac grappling techniques, we will explore these human concepts. Cadet Mitchell, you will assist in the instruction." Sarah inclined, her head slightly. "Of course, instructor." As the formal training session ended and cadets began to disperse, many lingered to speak with Sarah. The Zephyrian, who had expressed disbelief earlier, approached on chittering legs. "I apologize for my earlier skepticism," it said, its compound eyes reflecting dozens of tiny Sarahs. "Would you be willing to show me how these principles might apply to aerial combat?" "And crystalline resonance defense," added the quartzite. "Could momentum redirection work against energy-based attacks?" Sarah found herself surrounded by curious aliens, all eager to understand these human fighting concepts. Marcus caught her eye from across the room and gave her a small smile. They'd endured months of condescension and dismissal. Today felt like a turning point. As she began explaining how human martial arts principles might adapt to various alien physiologies, Sarah reflected on the irony. Humanity's greatest strength hadn't come from being the strongest or fastest. It came from needing to find another way to survive. Every limitation had forced them to innovate. Every weakness had demanded a creative solution. The combat training hall, designed for species that had evolved as natural warriors, was about to become a classroom for a different kind of strength: the Yao, power of adaptation, technique, and the refusal to accept that might always makes right. The lesson learned. The next morning brought a fundamental shift to Training Hall 7. Word had spread through the academy overnight, and cadets from other divisions crowded the observation galleries. Even senior instructors lined the upper platforms, their varied alien forms creating a bizarre assembly of tentacles, wings, and crystalline structures. Sarah arrived early, finding Instructor Krex already in the hall. He stood before a holographic display showing human martial arts from Earth's history: ancient Greek pankration, Japanese jujutsu, Brazilian capoeira, centuries of combat evolution played out in flickering images. "You studied all night," Sarah observed, recognizing the slight delay in his movements that indicated fatigue in Gorvac. "Physiology." Krex turned, his yellow eyes showing none of yesterday's hostility. "I underestimated your species. That failure demanded correction." He gestured to the displays. "Your combat systems, they're not just techniques. They're philosophies." "Survival philosophies," Sarah agreed. "When you can't outmuscle a saber-tooth, cat or outrun a pack of wolves, you learn to think differently." Other cadets began filing in, and Sarah noticed the change immediately. Instead of segregating by species, they mingled. A towering Valdorian spoke animatedly with a group of diminutive Nexari. Two quartzites demonstrated resonance patterns to fascinated Zephyrians. "Formation!" Krex called out, but his tone carried less bark than usual. "Today begins your real combat education. Cadet Mitchell, front and center." Sarah stepped forward, aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. In the observation galleries, she spotted Academy Commander Thrix, the ancient celestial whose crystalline form pulsed with slow, steady light. "Yesterday you witnessed something that challenged our fundamental assumptions about combat superiority," Krex announced. "Physical strength, natural armor, inherent speed. We've always considered these the determining factors in battle, but humans survived on a death world without any of these advantages. Cadet Mitchell, explain your species' approach." Sarah faced the assembled cadets. "Earth's history is written in blood and conflict. not just between humans, but against nature itself. Every predator was stronger, every prey was faster. We had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons. She paused, letting them visualize such vulnerability. So we developed something else, pattern recognition and tactical adaptation. She moved to the center of the training area. Who wants to attack me? Several cadets stepped forward eagerly. She selected a Zephyrian, its insectoid form towering over her at 7 feet tall, and a Valdorian whose psychic abilities made it dangerous at any range. Attack together, she instructed. Use your natural advantages. The Zephyrian struck first, its forearms blurring with speed, while gossamer wings provided aerial mobility. The Valdorian's third eye glowed, preparing a psychic push that could slam opponents into walls. Sarah didn't try to match their speed or power. Instead, she moved with economy, each step calculated. As the Zephyrian descended, she sidestepped minimally, guiding one of its arms past her while stepping into its flight path. The insectoid's momentum carried it forward just as the Valdorian released its psychic attack. The invisible force meant for Sarah instead caught the Zephyrian mid-flight, sending it tumbling across the mat. Sarah had positioned herself so that attacking her meant the allies would interfere with each other. Environmental awareness, she explained as both aliens regained their footing. Use your opponent's positions against them. Make them solve problems they didn't expect. She demonstrated with different combinations. A massive Gorvak paired with a swift Nixari, 3 quartzites whose resonance attacks could shatter steel, a group of ethereal minds whose intangibility seemed unbeatable. Each time, Sarah found ways to turn their advantages into liabilities. The Gorvak's size blocked the Nexari's movement lanes. The quartzite's resonance created interference patterns when used simultaneously. The ethereal mind's intangibility meant they couldn't affect her, while phased, giving her time to reposition. But this is defensive, protested a senior cadet, its scaled hide rippling with bioluminescent patterns. How do humans actually defeat superior opponents? Sarah smiled. By redefining defeat. Watch. She called forward Instructor Krex himself. Sir, please attempt to restrain me using standard Gorvak submission holds. Krex approached carefully, having learned yesterday's lesson. His forearms reached for her with calculated precision, each one capable of bending steel beams. Sarah let him grab her, then began to move, not struggling against his grip, but moving with it, finding the spaces between his fingers, the gaps in his hold. She twisted her wrist just so, stepped at an odd angle, dropped her shoulder unexpectedly. Within seconds, she'd slipped free without directly opposing his strength. Krex stared at his empty hands in bewilderment. This is our first principle, Sarah explained. Don't fight force with force. Water defeats rock not by being harder, but by finding every tiny crack and expanding them. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu calls this flow. The demonstrations continued throughout the morning. Sarah taught them about leverage points, how a 200-pound human could move a 1,000-pound object with the right fulcrum. She showed them timing principles from boxing, where a perfectly placed counterpunch carried more power than wild haymakers. When the ethereal minds questioned how physical techniques could work on energy beings, she introduced concepts from Tai Chi, redirecting force rather than generating it. She had them practice sensing intention rather than reacting to action. Your mind moves before your body, she explained to a fascinated group of psychic species. In that gap between thought and action lies opportunity. Commander Thrix descended from the observation gallery, its ancient form moving with deliberate grace. The Celestial's presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the hall. Cadet Mitchell. The commander's voice resonated like distant thunder. Demonstrate your principles against me. A hush fell over the hall. Celestials were considered the ultimate warriors, beings of living crystal who had achieved combat perfection over millions of years. For a human to face one was unprecedented. Sarah bowed respectfully. It would be an honor, Commander. Thrix assumed a ready stance, its crystalline form refracting light in hypnotic patterns. Unlike the previous demonstrations, this carried the weight of real evaluation. Everyone understood that this moment would determine whether human combat arts gained official recognition at the Academy. The celestial moved like lightning made solid, its crystal form blurring with speed. Sarah didn't try to match that velocity. Instead, she watched the light patterns, reading the refraction changes that preceded each movement. When Thrix struck, she was already moving, not away but at angles that made the celestial's linear speed less effective. She treated the battle like a chess match, thinking several moves ahead, positioning herself to limit Thrix's options. The combat flowed like a deadly dance. Thrix's attacks came in precise sequences, each one capable of shattering stone. Sarah responded with minimal movements, redirecting rather than blocking, using the celestial's own momentum to create openings. Then came the moment everyone remembered. Thrix launched a devastating combination, a high strike flowing into a low sweep followed by a direct thrust. It was a sequence that had never been successfully countered at the Academy. Sarah dropped beneath the high strike, but instead of trying to block the sweep, she rolled with it, using the impact to spin her body. As she rotated, her hand found a specific point on the celestial's arm, not to strike, but to guide. The thrust that should have ended the match instead carried Thrix past her as she completed her rotation. The celestial's own momentum, combined with Sarah's redirection, sent it stumbling forward. Not falling, celestials were too graceful for that, but clearly off balance, having to take 3 steps to recover. The hall erupted in shocked exclamations. A human had just successfully defended against a celestial's signature technique. Commander. Thrix straightened, its crystal form pulsing with what might have been amusement. Fascinating. You read the photon displacement in my crystal matrix to predict my movements. Light travels in straight lines, Sarah replied, breathing heavily but standing tall. Your form is beautiful, but that beauty creates patterns. Patterns can be predicted. Thrix inclined its head, a gesture of profound respect among Celestials. The Academy has focused too long on enhancing natural advantages while ignoring adaptive strategy. This must change. The commander addressed the entire assembly. Effective immediately, human combat philosophy will be integrated into our core curriculum. Cadet Mitchell will serve as consultant to the instructor staff. The announcement sparked immediate discussion among the cadets and instructors. Some species released pheromones of excitement, others chittered or hummed with curiosity. The paradigm shift was tangible. Humanity had just earned its place not through strength but through wisdom. Over the following weeks, the transformation was remarkable. Zephyrians adapted Aikido principles to aerial combat, learning to redirect opponents' flight paths. Quartzites discovered that human meditation techniques enhanced their resonance control. Valdorians found that understanding human psychology improved their psychic defense. Sarah worked with each species individually, helping them adapt human martial concepts to their unique physiologies. She taught Gorvaks like Krex how their arms could be used for complex joint locks rather than simple crushing force. She showed the serpentine Sithari how constriction techniques from human wrestling could enhance their natural binding abilities. The integration wasn't without challenges. Some techniques simply didn't translate across species. Others required significant modification. But the core principles, efficiency over power, adaptation over rigidity, wisdom over instinct, proved universal. One afternoon, while teaching a mixed group about pressure points, Sarah noticed how the dynamic had completely changed. Species that had barely acknowledged humans now sought them out as training partners. The 5 human cadets had gone from being seen as weak links to being recognized as technical specialists. You've given us more than techniques, Krex told her after a particularly intense session. You've shown us that strength has many forms. My people spent so long being physically superior that we stopped evolving tactically. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. Humans had the opposite problem. We were never the strongest, so we had to get creative. Every limitation became a puzzle to solve. The Academy's combat rankings began to shift. Human cadets previously at the bottom started rising as they applied their knowledge against physically superior opponents. Other species, incorporating human principles, found their own effectiveness increasing dramatically. The change reached beyond the training halls. In tactical simulations, mixed teams using human adaptive strategies consistently outperformed traditional doctrine. The Academy's military theorists began studying Earth's history with new interest, analyzing everything from ancient Greek phalanx formations to modern guerrilla warfare. During the final evaluation of the term, Sarah faced a gauntlet of opponents from different species. What had once been a dreaded test for human cadets became a masterclass in adaptive combat. She flowed from one challenger to the next, each victory demonstrating different principles: redirection against the Gorvak, footwork against the Nexari, psychological warfare against the Valdorians. Commander Thrix observed from above, its crystalline form reflecting satisfaction. "Your species brings balance to our strength," it told her afterward. "For too long we equated physical dominance with combat superiority. Humans remind us that the greatest weapon is the mind that guides the fist." As the term ended, Sarah stood before the assembled academy for a final demonstration. This time she faced multiple opponents of different species simultaneously, a scenario considered impossible for a human just months ago. The battle was choreographed chaos. 8 different aliens with wildly varying abilities attacked in coordinated waves. Sarah moved between them like water between stones, never where their strikes landed, always where their defenses were weakest. She used them against each other, turned their numbers into a disadvantage, made their diversity a weakness instead of a strength. When the dust settled, all 8 opponents were neutralized, not through injury, but through submission holds, pressure points, and positioning that left them unable to continue fighting. Sarah stood in the center, exhausted but victorious. The academy erupted in celebration. Cadets who had once dismissed humans now cheered alongside their human classmates. Instructors who had questioned humanity's inclusion in the galactic military now spoke of learning from Earth's martial traditions. As Sarah helped her opponents to their feet, she reflected on the journey. Humanity had spent millions of years as the underdog on Earth, developing wisdom through necessity. Now, among the stars, that hard-won knowledge was their gift to the galaxy. "The strongest warrior is not the one who never falls," she said, addressing the assembly for the last time that term. "It's the one who learns to turn every fall into a roll, every disadvantage into an opportunity, every weakness into unexpected strength." The academy would never be the same. In years to come, military historians would mark this as the moment when galactic combat doctrine evolved beyond pure physical dominance. They called it the human revolution, the day when being the smallest and weakest in the room stopped being a disadvantage and became the foundation for a new understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. And in the training halls of the Stellar Combat Institute, the legacy lived on. Each new class learned not just to fight with their natural advantages, but to think, adapt, and overcome. They learned that true strength came not from the body but from the mind that refused to accept defeat. The human way had become the galactic way, one perfectly executed throw at a time.